Okay, today we're going to talk about how to conduct research using the Moorpark College Library, and then also how to use this research to support your ideas within your outline. Let's get started. So many of you have probably taken a library tutorial before with Moorpark College, and you know that we have lots of different databases available to you as a student. So with your college tuition comes access to many different types of library sources. In fact, 80% of our library is online, while only 20% is actually at the library, which includes like encyclopedias and some hard copy books. So using our library databases, you can actually find all of the research that you need for your speeches. So this comes in the form of books. There are electronic books available using our school library. Newspapers. So we actually have subscriptions to several different newspapers, including the Huffington Post, Los Angeles Times, and New York Times, where you can find information on more current topics. We also have access to magazines. So maybe you're giving a speech about an event that's going on, or even a person. And so maybe you want to use magazines for this. For example, Time Magazine talked about Facebook owner Mark Zuckerberg and the cover of their magazine. You can also look for weekly newsletters. This is really good for hot topics or really current information, and specifically local information too. So maybe you want to look into the Los Angeles Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter about what's going on in Los Angeles. For example, on Olvera Street in November, they have a Dia de los Muertos festival or Day of the Dead festival where you can go and honor the dead in this area. And so you might want to turn to the LA Weekly for this. And of course, academic journals are the best source of information. We might not always be able to find information in academic journals depending on our subject. For instance, if you were giving a speech on COVID-19, you probably wouldn't find any academic journals because it's such a recent topic. But if you were going back and looking at SARS, then you probably could find some academic journals on this. An academic journal is a journal that's usually published by an expert in the field. And this journal is peer-reviewed by other professors in the field. These journals tend to look a little bit more academic or a little bit more boring. So the American Journal of Psychotherapy is a good example of an academic journal. You can also use online resources such as websites and even encyclopedias online, but make sure to cross-reference your information. This information isn't necessarily always correct. And usually this information is not peer-reviewed as well. So that means that it's not going to be as credible as a scholarly journal. All right, so you can also use internet resources and government resources. So this includes books and dictionaries, maps or charts that you find, reports. So I had a student give a report on steroid abuse, and so he found some information and statistics online. You can track government bills for new laws and upcoming information by going to govtrack.us and find these bills online. You can also find informational pamphlets. I had a student give a speech about breast cancer awareness and how to perform your own breast exam at home, and she found a helpful pamphlet online. She actually handed this pamphlet out to her classmates at the end of her speech. And then if you are talking about a place, then you definitely want to include maps. Maybe I want to talk about the United States election that's coming up, and so I want to show you an electoral map and which states voted for which candidates. So this would be a good example of when I could use maps. And the most common source that students use are websites. Remember, you want to check and see if the website is credible before using this website. I would try to avoid popular websites. So someone's personal website or just an informational website is not going to be as great as a published news source. So how can you tell if a website is good or bad? CSU came up with what they call the CRAAP test. And so using the acronym CRAAP, you should check your source to see if it's CRAAP or not. The first thing is currency. So how timely is this information? depending on your speech topic, you want to try to use information that's 1 to 3 years old. Now, if you're talking about a new subject, if you're talking about a current issue plan or policy, the legalization of a specific drug, for example, then you want to make sure that information is from the last 6 months. Now, if you're talking about an older topic, maybe you're giving your speech on LeBron James, you can find articles that are a few years old. I would say even up to 10 years old would probably be okay for this particular subject. If you're giving a speech about the Civil War in the United States and the day in the life of a soldier in the Civil War, you can obviously find sources in history books that are a little bit older. So depending on your speech topic, you want to make sure that you are finding timely and relevant information. So relevance also is important. There is a lot of information on the internet. You can find sources for almost anything. So it's your job to pick and choose the sources that work well for your particular speech. You may read through 10 sources and only end up using 1 or 2 of them. So make sure you're picking out information that is relevant to your speech topic. You can always narrow down your search by using the advanced search button on our Moorpark College Library website. So you can add additional keywords and phrases to narrow down your search. Maybe you're giving a speech on artificial intelligence, and so specifically you want to look into self-driving cars. So you can put artificial intelligence in the text box, and then you can also add the word self-driving car underneath that in the next search box. Okay, you want to look at the authority of the source. So who published this information? Is this a more liberal news site? Is it more conservative? Is it published by a university, or is it published just by somebody that it's a private institution and they're paying for the information themselves? So you want to make sure that the author is also credible. And if you're not sure about that, then I would suggest not using that source, or even just disclosing that it is a personal blog to your audience. Accuracy. So you want to make sure the information is reliable, truthful, and correct. You can do this by checking the information in multiple places. So see if you can find this information on another source. A lot of students ask if they can use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a really great place to start searching for information, but I would not cite any wikis. So what I would do instead is go to the very bottom of Wikipedia, and they have the websites and the sources hyperlinked. Click on those links and go to the original or primary source. Do not cite a wiki page. Instead, cite the original source that published that information. And finally, you want to ask, what is the purpose or reason that this information exists? Is this particular website trying to sell me something, or is it specifically just an informational website? So you want to look at the meaning behind the information. All right, so when you're researching your topic, there's lots of different types of information that you can use in your speech. You can present facts to the audience. You can give us definitions. You can give us personal testimonies or testimonies from other people. You can even give us testimonies from popular news sources or stories that you found. And you can give us examples. I love it when students include stories, narratives, and examples throughout their speech. So I had a student give a speech about animal cruelty. She specifically talked about her dog that she adopted. And so she told us where she found her dog and how she incorporated the dog into her family and where the dog is now. And so adding these examples, sort of peppering them in throughout your speech, really helps the listener comprehend and follow along with your speech. And you can also include interesting statistics in your speech. All right, so facts are typically short bits of verifiable information. Maybe you're giving a speech about the city of San Francisco, and so you want to say that the Golden Gate Bridge opened to traffic on May 28, 1937. This isn't really something that you need to cite. Most of the audience is going to accept this information with very minor support. So this is just an example of a very simple fact. you should give your audience definitions, so brief explanations about topics that may be unfamiliar. If you're talking about a new subject, if you're talking about a very specific subject, maybe something in the medical field, you want to make sure that if there are any slang, jargon, or acronyms, that you're giving us the definition of what this is. If you're telling us about CPR, what does CPR stand for? If you're giving us a speech about internet piracy, what is piracy? Give us the specific definition. You can even use the dictionary to simplify these definitions for your audience. The definition of piracy is the unauthorized or prohibited use of audiovisual works covered by copyright law. This will just help make your topic more clear for your audience so that they don't get confused. And you obviously don't want them to think of a pirate on a ship. Okay, one of my favorite things to do in a speech, especially a longer speech, is to include either personal testimony, lay testimony, or expert testimony. So this could be adding in your own personal story. My student who gave her speech about breast cancer awareness was a breast cancer survivor, and so she weaved her story in throughout her speech. You can give lay testimony. So maybe you want to talk about how we need more parking structures on campus, and you interviewed a few students on the Moore Park campus and you asked them their opinion. You can also look for prestige or expert testimonies. So this really depends on the status of the person. So let's say you're giving a speech about immigration and your parent is an immigrant. Maybe you want to interview them and include that story within your speech because they have direct experience with that. Maybe you're giving a speech about the importance of washing your hands, and so you want to interview a doctor, for example, someone who is an expert in the field. You can always reach out to your other professors who are experts in their fields for some expert testimony. All right, so examples are great because they can really illustrate your point in a nice detailed way for the audience. You can give us brief examples, which are just like really short examples, kind of like what I'm doing here in my PowerPoint. You can give us extended examples, so these are longer stories or narratives. Be careful with our speeches in class. All of our speeches are very short. They're under 6 minutes. So you want to make sure that your narratives are not very long. I would say 30 seconds to a minute would be the longest story I would tell. Or maybe weave a story in throughout your entire speech. You can also add short little stories like anecdotes in there. And you can give hypothetical examples or future possibilities of what could occur. So someone gave a speech on vaccines and they talked about what life would look like if we didn't have vaccines. So that's a good example of a hypothetical example. Maybe you're giving a persuasive speech about the right to die, or in some states they call it the Die with Dignity Act. And so this is a law that says that people should be allowed to choose the date of their death. And you could tell a story. For example, there was a young woman in California, her name was Brittany Maynard, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 brain cancer. She decided to actually move to Oregon because in that state they had the right to die, and she chose the date of her death. She found this to be more peaceful and less painful than dying from cancer. She actually got the chance to say goodbye to all of her friends on Facebook. She had a last hurrah with her husband and with her family, and so People magazine interviewed her and shared her testimony in their magazine. So if you're giving a speech on the Die with Dignity Act, maybe you want to tell Brittany's story throughout your speech as an example. Statistics are another way to give proof to your audience. So you only want to use facts and statistics if it directly connects to your topic. You don't want to confuse your audience or give us too much information. You only want to use statistics if it clarifies abstract ideas, and it's a great way to boost your credibility. So let's say you're talking about COVID-19 and the dangers of COVID-19 in the Los Angeles area. You might want to give us statistics on how many people were infected in 2020. So maybe I wanted to give my speech on opioid addiction in the United States or drug addiction in the United States. I might want to offer up some statistics to make my audience aware of this issue. So I might want to say, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of 2014 report, almost 8 million American adults battle with substance abuse. So as you can see, this is a large number of people who struggle with substance abuse. This is a good way to add a statistic into your speech and boost your credibility. Okay, you can also add quotations or paraphrases. When people are giving speeches about a particular person or a celebrity, I think it's a great idea to include quotations. This way we can hear that person's voice. Maybe you're giving a speech about the artist formerly known as Prince, and so I want to include a quote or a song lyric from Prince. For example, we know that Prince was unique, and so he has a quote that says, "Despite everything, no one can dictate who you are to other people," displaying that he was all about being unique and being yourself. All right, so where do you cite this information? Where do you include these facts, stories, and examples? You can always include them in your introduction. This is a great way to really pull your audience in. You can cite in your attention-grabbing statement, credibility material, and in your reason to listen. You can also cite within the body of your speech. I would suggest only citing in your subpoints and sub-subpoints. I wouldn't include citations in main points. Main points are meant to be very short, clear, and concise. Main points should only be one sentence, but your subpoints and sub-subpoints is where you want to include your facts, citations, statistics, and examples. And finally, you can include these citations in your conclusion. So maybe you want to end with a quote or some sort of inspirational thought at the end of your speech, or a staggering statistic. That's a great place to cite as well. So we call these parenthetical citations, or citing parenthetically. That's because typically in APA format, you would cite the author's last name and the date of publication within parentheses. I'm going to teach you actually how to write your sources into your outline so that you don't cite them parenthetically, but instead you actually weave them into your speech so that it flows really nicely. I'm going to show you that in a second. You should also cite your sources on a works cited page. APA style has you title the works cited page Works Cited, and then you should list all of your sources in APA format in alphabetical order. For most of your speeches, you should try to use scholarly sources, but depending on your topic, you may use a popular source. And then finally, your sources should be said orally in your speech, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. All right, so some helpful websites are the Owl at Purdue. This has a full APA manual. I love this website. You don't have to buy the APA manual online. You can simply go to the Owl at Purdue, and they have examples of how to cite your sources both in text and on your works cited page. Some other websites that students like to use are easybib.com, Citation Machine, and you can even use our online writing lab. Every student has 10 hours of free online tutoring, so you just need to go to Smart Thinking in Canvas. If you're going to have someone grade your outline online, it does take 24 hours, so plan ahead. Okay, so now, how do you actually say your sources orally in your speech? We call this an oral or a verbal citation. I like it when students write a citation paragraph. So this means you write your citation into your paragraph in your outline. So some guidelines. You should always write the source first and then your paraphrase or your quote. So your source should almost always precede the information that you give your audience. Cite your source first, then cite the author or who wrote the source, and then cite the date. Now, you don't have to use the title, but if you want to use the title, if the title of the website or the article says a little something about your topic, you can include the title of the article as well. Use words from the Language for Source Citations list. So I've uploaded a document on Canvas that says Guidelines for Citing Sources. It has a list of words that you can use in your oral citations. We want to avoid saying, according to the Los Angeles Times, according to the Huffington Post. Instead, you want to use more variety in your speech. So I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Here's an example of a citation paragraph. The 2015 Los Angeles Times article written by Jesse Peterson points out. So as you see, I have the date, I have the source type, and I also have the author, and then after that, my quote will follow. Okay, so here are some more samples. You can find this on the PDF document online called Guidelines for Citing Sources, but these are just examples of how you can add some variety to your citation paragraphs. You don't always have to say it in the order of source, author, date. Sometimes you can say date and then the source. Really depends on what sounds good within your speech. So you could say the Wall Street Journal explained on July 2012, or you could say the April 2007 issue of Nature magazine added. So these are just some examples of how you can actually incorporate your sources. All right, and this is that document that I was talking about, which you can download the PDF version on Canvas. It's called Language for Citing Sources. I believe I titled your document on Canvas Guidelines for Citing Sources. It's a 3-page document. And so add a little variety to your verbal citations. Here's a list of words that you could use instead of according to, and I've kind of organized them by speech type. So these are some standard examples: according to, acknowledged, addressed. Maybe you are wanting to highlight the author because the author is really credible, so some author-based examples could be so-and-so asserted, or in the words of famous poet, Edgar Allan Poe or something like that. And so you can sort of use these to help add a little variety to your verbal citations. All right, so head to Canvas and download that document, the Guidelines for Citing Sources. We will have a practice activity on our discussion board about how to cite sources, and then I expect to see your sources in your informative and persuasive speeches this semester. Happy citing!